Started a study in the book of Nehemiah. So I gave you a timeline last week, and there's some more on the table if you didn't happen to get one. And then I also put on the table a map of the wall of Jerusalem. And so particularly if you're reading chapter 3, it will help you understand chapter 3 a lot better. But it will also come into play a little later on in the story. So I'll try to keep some available because we'll need it later as well. Nehemiah and Malachi kind of compete for the last book chronologically in our Old Testament. They both end somewhere in the neighborhood of 430 BC. And so there is a period where of silence in terms of Scripture between the Old Testament and the New Testament that starts after Nehemiah or after Malachi. You remember that Nehemiah, the word itself means the Lord comforts, the Lord shows compassion. And you remember that he heard a report from his brothers and sisters who had come from Judah, and that report was that things were not going well, that the wall of the city of Jerusalem lay in ruins, and that the people were having a very difficult time. And so you remember last week we looked at the passage where Nehemiah fasts and he prays and he lifts up a beautiful prayer that's recorded for us in chapter 1 where he confesses his people's sin as well as his own sin and remembers the covenants and the promises that God had made. And so a few months later, after fasting and praying for several months, he approaches the king. And the king says, what is it that you want? And Nehemiah is able to tell him what he wants. And the king sends Nehemiah to Judah with building materials, with money, with letters to pave the way. When he gets there, he inspects the walls quietly to kind of see what he's up against. And then he announces to the people. So I'll kind of review chapter 2, verse 17. Then I said to them, you see the trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace. I told them about the gracious hand of my God on me and what the king had said to me. And they replied, let's start rebuilding. And so they began this good work. So Nehemiah was able to rally the support of the people, and the building project would begin. And so in chapter 3, you have an account of this building project. And there are a lot of names and there are a lot of places. And if you have the little map that I provided for you, you can kind of see how it starts. It starts with the sheep gate. Now, those of you that were with us Sunday night knew the importance of the sheep gate. That's the gate that Jesus entered as he made his way into Jerusalem. And I think John makes the comment in the video that that symbolism was unmistakable with him being the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world, the gate that the Passover lambs would come through for the Passover sacrifice. So you'll see the sheep gate up there at the top, and then as you read chapter 3, it will go counterclockwise all the way around this wall. And you may see a note there on the top of that diagram that says the circumference of the wall is 1.5 miles. So it's a lot of area that's being covered. Now, it looks kind of small, too, because Jerusalem is kind of small at this point. And as you read through chapter 3, there'll be some places where in Hebrew it talks about them abandoning the former wall and making this wall a little smaller. And so they did what they were able to do. What's the point of building a wall? Why you need one? All right, there are attacks. There are armies. There are nations. Judah, Israel is on a path where if you're in Africa and want to conquer Europe, you go through Jerusalem. If you're in Asia and want to conquer Africa, you go through Jerusalem. If you're in Europe and want to conquer Africa, you go through Jerusalem. So it is the crossroads there that everybody goes to conquer everybody else. And so it fends off attacks. Why else would you build a wall? Okay, so it's a physical boundary. So A lot of times, if you look at our map in the United States, rivers or other things kind of make up the border between states sometimes. So that wall sets off what is Jerusalem and what's outside of Jerusalem. Why else would you build a wall? All right, keep people out perhaps. You can shut the gates at night, keep those who would steal from you or kill you outside the gates. Okay? Well, let me say it a little different way. If you got a bunch of rubble all around, and these are constant reminders that your city was completely destroyed and not one stone was left on top of another, would rebuilding a wall do anything for your psychological health? It would. It would raise your self-esteem. And along that line, it will be a reminder that God's not done with us yet. We were in rubble, and now God is at work to restore. God is at work to revive. God is at work to renew. And so rebuilding the wall has that effect as well. So I won't read chapter 3 for you, but you can read it as you want to. Lots of different names, but let me just point out a few things in chapter 3. There are 10 different gates that they work on, and there are 40 different work crews. And the people working on the wall, some of them made perfume for a living. Some of them were priests. Some of them were government employees who were over different areas of the land. So people from a wide variety of occupations. Some of them are rich. Some of them are poorer than poor. So if you've got 40 crews all working on the same wall, all working together, what could that potentially do for your nation? All right, united, stronger, community. Now, I'm all for having church on Sunday. I think we should, and I hope you'll come. But there are times when we need to get to know each other better than you can just get to know somebody if you show up for a little bit on Sunday. And so working together, serving together, accomplishing things together. Sometimes not only as you're building the wall, but the walls between people get broken down, and you get to know people, and you get to love people, and it builds community and encouragement there. And so as you read through chapter 3, you'll see that that this takes place, that they're working hard on this wall together, and it's a lot of different people. You'll also notice that Nehemiah is well organized. Think about the organization that would take place if you had 40 different work crews to coordinate. And Nehemiah is careful to arrange it so that people have a stake in what they're doing. So if their house or their ancestors' homes were near a part of the wall, that's where he assigned their work crew. So he is strategic in the way that he arranges these things, and the work continues. And so chapter 3 gives us a detailed description of what the wall under construction was like in all the different places. Now, archaeologists have been able to find Nehemiah's wall, and we'll see as we get to chapter 4 that it's a little contrary to what the opponents were saying. But the wall that they have found is 9 feet thick. That's a thick wall. If you ever get the chance to visit Jerusalem, you will see that there are lots of walls around the city of Jerusalem. And some of them are from the time of David. Some of them are from Nehemiah's time. Some of them were built during the Crusades. So just lots and lots and lots of different walls and different dimensions of where the city occupied. If you glance at this map, you'll see that the dominant feature on it is the temple. So you'll see kind of a square at the very top of the map. That was the temple area. And it had been rebuilt previously. Well, do you think everybody is happy that this work has begun? No, everybody's not happy. And so in chapter 4, we'll see the opposition that takes place to the rebuilding of this wall. Okay, so they're under Persian rule, and one of the ways that the Persians govern their people is that they would appoint governors over each little area. So the Trans-Euphrates is an area that has its own governor that's been appointed. And you'll notice that the Trans-Euphrates governor is not happy about the wall being rebuilt. He sees it as a threat, and possibly a threat to Persia as well, but mostly to himself. Persia is over everything, but they have employed local people to be these governors and that kind of thing. So you'll see as we get into the opposition that these folks some of them are Samaritans, some of them are Arabians, some of them are Philistines, some of them are Ammonites. So the local people who were left after the Assyria conquered them and then after Babylon conquered them are some of the people who are opposing this building project. So where does trouble come from? Well, two places: outside and inside. Would y'all agree with that? There are forces outside that oppose the work of God in our lives. There are. There are forces inside that oppose the work of God in our lives. And so as we read chapters 4 and 5, we'll see the outside forces and the inside forces that are at work to keep this from happening. So chapter 4, verse 1, when Salabat, and you may remember I told you that archaeologists have discovered letters to and from him in Egypt and in Persia. So he kind of left his mark in history. When Salabat heard that they were rebuilding the wall, he became angry and was greatly incensed. Now, I suspect that this in some way cuts into his pocketbook. He does not want the Jewish people to rebuild. He does not want them to be safe. He does not want them to thrive. He does not want them to prosper. And he is a Samaritan. Now, you know from your reading of the New Testament that Jews did not associate with Samaritans. You know, John chapter 4, Jesus sits down at a well and he's thirsty. He asks this woman for a drink and she said, "Why are you talking to me? Your people don't talk to my people." And a Jewish man certainly wouldn't talk to a Samaritan woman, but Jesus did, didn't he? Jesus tells a story of a man who's left for dead along the side of the road, and a priest won't stop and help him, and a Levite won't stop and help him, but who stops? A good Samaritan. So these are the Samaritans. They did not welcome the Jewish people back in, and there is a bitter, ugly rivalry that takes place between Judah and Samaria from this point forward. And so by the time of Jesus, it is escalated, of course. They burned each other's stuff, and they've destroyed each other's things, and they've taken each other's lives. So a lot of hatred between those two groups. So when he heard they were rebuilding the wall, he became angry and was greatly incensed. If you're incensed with someone, what level of anger is that? That's pretty high up there, isn't it? He ridiculed the Jews, and in the presence of his associates and the army of Samaria, he said, "What are these feeble Jews doing? Will they restore their wall? Will they offer sacrifices? Can they finish in a day? Can they bring the stones back to life from the heaps of rubble, burned as they are?" Tobiah the Ammonite, who was at his side, said, "What are they building? Even a fox climbing up on it would break down their wall of stones." So according to this Ammonite, is it going to be a sturdy wall? Nope, he says a fox can run across it and demolish it. They're wondering what could happen with these burned out stones. So they're verbally assaulting the folks working on the wall and causing them to have doubt and to wonder if what they're doing is in vain or not. So their first tactic here is insult. They're going to insult them, they're going to belittle them, and see if that can cause them to quit building. So what do the people do? Do they run out and knock them down? No, they pray. They pray. Hear us, O God, for we are despised. Turn their insults back on their own heads. Give them over as plunder in a land of captivity. Do not cover up their guilt or blot out their sins from your sight, for they have thrown insults in the face of the builders. So, prayer is lifted up. Now, from a New Testament perspective, this prayer isn't terribly nice. Jesus taught us to pray for our enemies and pray for those who despitefully use us, but we're not supposed to pray for their harm. We're supposed to pray for their good. David did it a lot. So you're quite right. This is the pattern. It's established in the Psalms. There are many Psalms that have this rough kind of sound to them. And the bottom line, or the theology behind this type of prayer, is that they have put themselves in a position to be enemies of God. And so the prayer is, Lord, take care of your enemies. So that sounds kind of rough to our modern ears. What would have been the alternative? What do they not do? And of course, I've already given away this answer. They don't seek revenge. They don't return evil for evil. They put it in God's hands. And even though it's not quite as far along as what Jesus teaches us to do, it's still better than what we would normally do. They put it in God's hands. Is it easy to forgive someone who has wronged you? It is not. And I know what we're supposed to do, but if you can't do that, can you take baby steps toward that and trust God to bring you the rest of the way? So this probably isn't the full example of what we're supposed to do when people insult us, but it takes some steps in that direction. He doesn't retaliate. He instead turns it over to God and knows that God will act in a just and correct and right way. So, verse 6, we rebuilt the wall till all of it reached half its height, for the people worked with all their heart. So this is a huge undertaking, 1.5 miles of wall, 9 feet thick, and they've gotten it to half of its normal height already. So they've made progress, and Nehemiah, you can kind of hear the joy and the pride he takes in the work of the people. They worked at it with all their heart. Now that's a great description. Are there people today who work at their jobs with all their heart? There are, but there aren't so many of them. I tell the students that Andy and I teach that if you have at least a little bit of the work ethic that the Bible teaches, you will shine like stars. Your employers will be so happy with you because in the culture in which we live, there's not a lot of work ethic. And so if you can be honest and put in an honest day's wage, honest day's work for an honest day's wage, if you can, not steal things, you are head and shoulders above most of the people that you will work with. And that's a sad indictment on our culture, but nevertheless, it's true. But Nehemiah says they worked at it with all their heart. Well, that settles it, right? They've insulted them, and the people prayed, and they worked at it with all their heart, and they probably won't have any more opposition. Nope. So when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabs and the Ammonites and the people of Ashdod heard that the repairs to Jerusalem's walls had gone ahead and that the gaps were being closed, they were very angry. So we've got angry, greatly incensed, and now very angry. And they all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and stir up trouble against it. Now, if you look at a map, the Samaritans would have been to the north, the Ammonites would have been to the east, the Arabians would have been to the south, and the Philistines would have been to the west. So on how many sides do they have enemies? Yeah, they are completely surrounded. It's not terribly unlike the modern situation in the Middle East. So they have enemies on all sides, and these people are angry, and they have decided they're going to come and fight. They're going to undo the work. They're going to seek to destroy. They're going to use violence to accomplish what they want to accomplish. So, what would be the response? What in the world could you do about something like that? Look at verse 9. They prayed. We prayed. We prayed to our God, and we posted guard day and night to meet this threat. So they pray. They trust God to take care of them, and they provide security and help for the people, raise morale. So they faced insults, they faced threats of physical violence, and both times they've responded with prayer and wisdom. Now look at verse 10. Meanwhile, the people of Judah said, "The strength of the laborers is giving out, and there's so much rubble that we cannot rebuild the wall." One commentator I read said that this was a song. In my Bible, it's in parentheses, quotation marks. The strength of the laborers is giving out, and there's so much rubble that we cannot rebuild the wall. Now, there are a lot of songs in American culture. Do y'all know I've been working on the railroad? We could probably sing a few choruses of that without too much trouble. Work songs, songs that kind of help you. Snow White had those dwarfs that whistled while they worked. So here they're singing a song as they work, but how about those lyrics? Encouraging or discouraging? Discouraging. It's kind of a lament. It's kind of a negative thing. There's so much rubble, and we're not making progress the way we ought to. This is an impossible task, and we're tired. The strength of the laborers is given out. So would you call that poor morale? I'd call it poor morale. You got folks that are just too tired to continue. Also, our enemies said, "Before they know it or see us, we'll be right there among them, and we'll kill them and put an end to the work." So they've insulted them. They've threatened them with violence. And now here they are generating a culture of fear. While you're working on this, while you're concentrating on this, we're going to sneak up behind you and kill you. So their neighbors are friendly? No, not so much. Then the Jews who lived near them came and told us, 10 times over, wherever you turn, they will attack us. So the people that lived out in the countryside are basically saying, hey, y'all need to leave the city. Y'all are asking for trouble by building this wall. So where's the trouble coming from? It's coming from outside, and it's coming from inside. And there is great discouragement. How would you like to be Nehemiah? Therefore, verse 13, I stationed some of the people behind the lowest points of the wall at the exposed places, posting them by families with their swords, spear, and bows. Why does he post them by families? Okay, family has a stake in that piece of land to protect it and watch over it. And if you're fighting to protect the people near you and they're your family, would that cause you to fight harder? It would. So Nehemiah is being very strategic there, and he is. The wall is long; it's big, a mile and a half around, but he finds the strategic points that need the most attention, the most protection. And I looked things over, and I stood up and said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, "Don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome. Fight for your families, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes." A couple weeks back in the older men's class and the ladies' class and the youth class, we had a lesson on David and Goliath. Do y'all remember the story of David and Goliath? David was a little fella, and he went up against a giant. Why in the world did he do that? Well, because David was convinced that God was bigger than the giant. He wasn't convinced that he was bigger than the giant. He knew he was a little fella, but he was convinced that God was bigger than the giant. Nehemiah is convinced that God is bigger than their enemies. God is bigger than the ones who would oppose him. And why would he put his confidence in God? Well, God has helped him all the way through. As you've read chapters 1 and 2, the hand of the Lord was at work. The hand of the Lord was doing this. The Lord directed. The Lord stirred up. The Lord was at work. And so Nehemiah is confident that he is part of what God is planning, and he puts his trust and his faith in God, and he encourages the people to put their faith and trust in God as well. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome. If your God is small, then you're going to spend all of your time worrying, because God's not big enough to help you with your troubles. But if your God is big, there's no need to worry, because God's got it. So Nehemiah reminds them that God is great and awesome. When our enemies heard that we were aware of their plot and that God had frustrated it, we all returned to the wall, each to our own work. So there's still work to be done. From that day on, half of my men did the work, while the other half were equipped with spears, shields, bows, and armor. So the work's going to be a little slower now. How come? Yep, half the people are guarding and half the people are working. The officers posted themselves behind all the people of Judah who were rebuilding the wall. And those who carried materials did their work with one hand and held a weapon in the other. And each of the builders wore his sword at his side as he worked. But the man who sounded the trumpet stayed with me. So Nehemiah has a plan. And he doesn't go into detail here about what would happen if they blew that trumpet necessarily. Well, I think later on it does say that they'd all go to the point where the trumpet blast was heard. But he's giving direction, and he's hands-on, and he's involved with the work, and he's watching over the people. Do you think Nehemiah is a good leader? I do too. I think folks could learn a lot from Nehemiah. Well, chapter 4, verse 19. Then I said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, the work is extensive and spread out, and we're widely separated from each other along the wall. So whenever you hear the sound of the trumpet, join us there. Our God will fight for us. So what's the problem with being scattered and spread out? All right, there's area for the enemy. Okay, you got small groups that can't really fight off what a large group could fight off. There are also communication issues. So Nehemiah is at work to kind of solve some of those difficulties and problems. So we continued the work with half the men holding spears from the first light of dawn till the stars came out. How long are they working? Yeah. kind of a poetic way to say that. At that time, I also said to the people, have every man and his helper stay inside Jerusalem at night, so that they can serve as guards by night and as workers by day. Neither I, nor my brothers, nor my men, nor the guards with me. All right, don't be too put off by the lack of cleanliness here. None of these guys took off our clothes. Each had his weapon, even when he went for water. That last part might be a euphemism. So they're armed and ready at all times, and they don't have the luxury of being off duty or changing into comfortable clothes. They stay dressed and ready for battle at all times. And who's doing this? Verse 23. It's the guy in charge and the people under him who are giving this kind of care and supervision and work. So chapter 4 tells us about this opposition and about how God is meeting it, but there's some other problems. So they haven't been back in the land long, but there are already poor people and there are already rich people. And if you got poor people and rich people, they're generous and they help each other so that nobody has any need. Is that usually what happens in our world? If you got rich people and poor people, what usually happens? Yes, and the rich get richer. What happens to the poor? The poor get poorer. And that's sort of been the way it's always been. So already there are rich people, wealthy people, and there are very poor people. Now the men and their wives raised a great outcry against their fellow Jews. Some were saying, we and our sons and daughters are numerous. In order for us to eat and stay alive, we must get grain. Others were saying, we are mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our homes to get grain during the famine. Still others were saying, we've had to borrow money to pay the king's tax on our fields and vineyards. Although we are the same flesh and blood as our fellow Jews, and though our children are as good as theirs, yet we have to subject our sons and daughters to slavery. Some of our daughters have already been enslaved, but we are powerless because our fields and our vineyards belong to others. So not only are the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, but the rich are getting rich at the expense of the poor. So they're in a difficult spot. They should be working together, helping each other. They're building the wall together, but some are oppressing others. When I heard their outcry and these charges, I was very angry. There's a lot of anger in Nehemiah. Have y'all noticed that? I was very angry. I pondered them in my mind. So he thought about it a little while. And then accused the nobles and officials. I told them, you are charging your own people interest. Now, if you've read the Old Testament, you know that that is commanded against. At least 3 times in the law, God tells his people, do not charge interest with your own people. It's okay to charge interest to a foreigner, but don't charge interest with your own people. Take care of each other. Help each other. Don't exploit each other. Don't oppress each other. And so Nehemiah makes the accusation, contrary to what the law says, contrary to what you should be doing, contrary to what God has told you, you're charging interest to your own people. So I called together a large meeting to deal with them and said, as far as possible, we have bought back our fellow Jews who were sold to Gentiles. Now you are selling your own people only for them to be sold back to us. They kept quiet because they could find nothing to say. In modern days, we call it human trafficking. So Nehemiah has quietly been buying people back, redeeming people, paying the price so that they don't have to be slaves. So Nehemiah's been doing this. Meanwhile, the wealthy among the Jewish people have been selling folks into slavery. So there's this cycle going on. And Nehemiah says, I'm buying back the people you're selling. This isn't working out so well. And how did they respond? Well, they kept quiet. They didn't have much to say. So I continued, what you are doing is not right. Shouldn't you walk in the fear of our God and avoid the reproach of our Gentile enemies? I and my brothers and my men are also lending the people money and grain. But let us stop charging interest. Give back to them immediately their fields and vineyards and olive groves and houses, and also the interest you are charging them. 1% of the money, grain, new wine, and olive oil. Now, do y'all think miracles happen? Can y'all think of any miracles in the Bible? I think of Moses. He raises that staff and God parts the Red Sea and the people walk across on dry land. That'd be dramatic, wouldn't it? Jesus calls forth Lazarus from the tomb. That'd be pretty dramatic. Those are impressive miracles. But listen, the miracle that happens here in this chapter of Nehemiah, it's absolutely amazing. It might be bigger than the parting of the Red Sea. Nehemiah preaches to them. Nehemiah challenges them. Nehemiah tells them they're not doing the right thing. And then look at verse 12. We will give it back, they said. And we will not demand anything more from them. We will do as you say. Now, don't y'all think that's a big miracle? Greed gets the best of us. And for these folks to realize the need and realize what they're supposed to do and repent and turn that around is a huge miracle. But Nehemiah is a wise fellow, and he's thinking to himself, just because you told me you're going to do it might not mean you're really going to do it. So I summoned the priests and made the nobles and officials take an oath to do what they promised. I also shook out the folds of my robe and said, in this way may God shake out of their house and possessions anyone who does not keep this promise. May such a person be shaken out and emptied. And at this the whole assembly said, Amen. And they praised the Lord, and the people did what they promised. I told you miracles happen. It happens right here in the book of Nehemiah. He goes on to say, moreover, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when I was appointed to be their governor in the land of Judah until his 32nd year, 12 years, neither I nor my brothers ate the food allotted to the governor. But the earlier governors, those who preceded me, placed a heavy burden on the people and took 40 shekels of silver from them in addition to food and wine. Their assistants also lorded it over the people. But out of reverence for God, I did not act like that. Instead, I devoted myself to the work on this wall. All my men were assembled there for the work. We did not acquire any land. Furthermore, 150 Jews and officials ate at my table, as well as those who came to us from the surrounding nations. One day, 1 ox, 6 choice sheep, and some poultry were prepared for me, and every 10 days an abundant supply of wine of all kinds. In spite of all this, I never demanded the food allotted to the governor, because the demands were heavy on these people. Remember me with favor, my God, for all I've done for these people. So, Persian taxes were notoriously high. And part of the Persian strategy with letting people go back home is that they could plant fields and vineyards and cultivate their land and then pay a heavy tax. So while it's nice that the Persians let them go back home, benevolence was not at the top of their motivation for this. They had the idea that the people are prosperous will be prosperous. So they inflicted a very heavy tax on the people. And then on top of that, you had the local government inflicting a heavy tax. And so Nehemiah is telling us he did not make the people pay taxes, and he did not steal their food for his table. And he fed well over 100 people every day. So where's the food coming from? Well, God provides, and Nehemiah provides too. It's coming from his savings. It's coming from his own money. So he's not only not taking the people's money, he is using his money to help the people. And he says, Lord, I hope you'll remember me. The people probably aren't going to give him a lot of thanks, a lot of praise. But you know, the Lord notices when we do right, notices when we do wrong too. Who are we really accountable to? God. So I hope you see Nehemiah's leadership in the face of bad opposition. He remains true to the Lord. He motivates, he encourages, he helps the people. And how long is it going to take them to build this wall? Did y'all say 52 days? 52 days to build this wall. And so the Lord is going to give them strength. Do we ever face opposition? Yes, we do. In fact, Jesus told us that if we're following him, we're going to have opposition. And so we have a lot to learn from Nehemiah in the way that he approached these difficult situations. Well, thank you so much for being with us tonight. Lord willing, I'd like to teach a little more Nehemiah next Wednesday night, so come back if you can. Let me close with prayer. Father, we thank you for the example that Nehemiah set so long ago. And we realize that human nature hadn't changed. And the things that he struggled with are the same things we might struggle with. Help us, Father, to be faithful to you and desire to please you with all of our choices. We ask